we had come back in the summer of 1979. We had come back from our 2-year posting in Berlin, and we had talked about things because in Berlin you had to carry an ID card everywhere, and you had to have a special, stamp in your passport to be able to live there, etc. And you needed to make sure that you had your ID card anywhere that you went. It wasn't too restrictive, but you're kind of very aware of the environment you were living in. And we had talked about what it would be like to go to Northern Ireland and had a long talk about it. And I said, you know what, Gary, I just don't think I've been personally through a lot, in the year before, and I was hospitalized just before we came back, with septicemia, and it was a very close call. So I was kind of recovering from quite a lot of things. And it was a case of, I don't think I can cope with being in an army camp, and I've got to be escorted anywhere that I go. And I know that, the way things are in terms of the way the British are perceived in that environment. And the idea of being stuck in a camp with a load of wives while you could be here, there, and everywhere. I'd be better off being in the UK. And he agreed, and that's the agreement we made for that 18-month tour. So he left, and he'd been only gone a month when, if you imagine the scenario, back in those days, we had this thing in the UK that there wasn't enough phone lines. So you'd have to put your name down and maybe wait 6 months for a phone. It was way before there was something like a mobile phone. There was no internet. There was no way of communicating apart from landlines and letters. And so I had a lovely neighbour at the time, and the agreement was that Gary would call me at the neighbour's until we got our own phone. And he had been doing that when he first sort of got over there. So he's only been there a month. One day, my neighbour came flying through the door and just said, "Go and get the phone." And your heart just sinks because you don't know what you're going to find on the other end of that phone. And it's the only time in my entire marriage that I've seen, I wasn't seeing, I was hearing Gary completely out of control, totally distraught. Every other word was a swear word. And I'm on the end of the phone just listening because he's trying to get all this stuff out. And then in between, I hear the swear words and bomb, and then more swear words and crying. And to know the kind of husband that I had, for him to be that out of control emotionally was highly unusual. And all I grasped was that something terrible had happened. And eventually, after a couple of minutes, he became a bit more coherent. And then I got the understanding that a remote control bomb had gone off. Now, we had a code between us, and he said, I'm not going to be able to tell you where I'm going, while I'm over there, because we never know what phone lines might be tapped or whatever. So we had a code between us, and our code was that if he said to me, "I'll call you tomorrow," that meant he was in camp. Didn't mean he was going to call me the next day. He might call me the day after, but it meant he was in camp. If he said, "I'm a bit short of money this week, so I'll call you in a few days," that told me that he was going somewhere. Wouldn't know where. So I only had knowledge, of when he was around and when he might be out on patrol somewhere. And what happened that day, so he'd moved into A company after we left Berlin. He'd gone into A company. And he'd done as far as I was told he had done an extra duty, and therefore they get 12-hour sheet rest. You know, you've got to have a certain amount of rest. Um, and so it was his company that got hit. And it's always more personal when you know people. It's horrendous anytime it happens. But the closer you are to people, you know, if it's your platoon or if it's your company, the the stronger bonds you have with those guys. And what had happened was there were two remote control bombs that had gone off, and the results were absolutely just horrendous. It was many, many years later, and it makes me very emotional to even think about this because I have been that person that's got the knock on the door. But there was one officer that all that was left of him was his face to identify him. It is the most heinous of crimes. You can't fight a remote control bomb. You know, that's dirty fighting, but that's terrorism.
What what were the what was the number of those who were killed and wounded?
There was 16 two-para that died and two Queensland Highlanders, and then there were six badly injured.
Now, at the time, because of this extra duty Gary had done, he was not with them when those bombs went off.
Yeah.
Was that was part of the burden that he carried after that event? Was part of the burden just the thought that I should have been with them when that happened? To be with the guys when they experienced that? Do you think, I don't know if you use the phrase survivor's guilt in Britain or not, but do you think that might have been part of it?
I have to take a deep breath with this one. Um, yeah, there's always an element of that. Whether it's actually got the label and whether it's actually given the name of survivor guilt or whether it's just expressed with emotions. For Gary, and I think this is where many forces marriages fail. For Gary, his personality just changed completely. He was I'm the pragmatic one. You know, I'm not particularly romantic. He was the romantic. The weird thing was, you know, he was the elite special forces who donned the uniform and put a gun in his hand. And yet at home he was a total romantic. You know, would leave me notes all over the place and, you know, buy me flowers and that kind of thing. And I'm the one that, you know, that would forget, wouldn't even think about, you know, that sort of thing. Um, and to see somebody go from being so warm and loving and having such excitement for life to being really cold is hard. It's really hard. And I think if you speak to, you know, I think in the 70s, from memory, 3 out of 4 forces marriages failed. You know, when you get married, the idea is the vows are for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, till death us do part. But we think of that as oh, if somebody gets Parkinson's or you know they get ill when we're getting old and we've had all these wonderful years together, nobody thinks of it in terms of the emotional side of it. And we're going back to a time, you know, it's bad enough now, you know, we're encouraging men to talk about their emotions these days, but we're still having to encourage them. You know, we're talking about the 70s when men didn't talk about their emotions unless they just happened to have. Gary did because we had a very close relationship. So he could, there's nothing we couldn't tell each other. And that kind of intimate connection that you have, it's heartbreaking when that has a break to it. You know, when it's something outside of it changes somebody's personality.
Did he talk about Warrenpoint when you're at the table or when you're someplace? Would he bring it up, or was it something that he just swallowed?
Um, it was in the initial days after it happened. He, as I said, you know, when he phoned me, he was completely out of control, and I think his way of dealing with it was to put it on the back burner, park it. I've got a job to get on with. This has happened, but we're here for 18 months, and I've got to have my wits about me because we don't know when or if this could happen again.
You said that he was, kind of a romantic
Mm.
guy. Um, and so then does that become, and it seems that you're implying he was a guy who would, share what he's thinking. Now are we talking about a guy who's kind of shut down? You see him kind of looking off into space, that kind of thing?
No, not so much looking off into space. He still when he came home when he came home on leave, he was still good fun. He still wanted to have fun. Um, but there was a coldness about him. The man that I married, who would literally bare his soul to me, and you know, emotionally, that person was shut down. So I can't say that he had signs of the typical what you're talking about is the PTSD and the you know the complete you know it wasn't like that. It just had. He was a very sensitive man, and it shut down his sensitivities for a long time.
I want to link this then to something else that you write, and you say that when this conflict in the Falklands stirs up, and this war that just in some ways, at least from the American perspective, just seems so strange. Britain and Argentina are at war with one another over these islands in the South Atlantic. Um, but you say what I've heard other veterans of the Falklands War say, that you know, you say he was excited when the news came in, and when he realized that he might be involved. You said that there was a kind of hunger for this kind of thing, um, for the chance to get into conflict, which is something you're training for. So you get to see, you said in Warrenpoint that's you can't defend against that. I mean, you can. There are things you can do
Yeah,
against, um, bombs in the road, but it's a it's not that's not I don't think what he's been training to do. Um,
no,
and so part of the excitement, I suppose, is okay, well, now we get to exercise what we've been training to do. But do you think part of that excitement was in some sense also a feeling that he could now psychologically respond to what happened in Warrenpoint, that the Falklands will give him a chance to respond to what happened in Warrenpoint? Do you think there's a connection there?
100%. It's not that it's not that you have a mix up in your head between the Argentinians and the Irish. What it is that you know that you have been in a situation of complete injustice of which you could do nothing about it. When you were on tour of Northern Ireland, you never knew what was coming at you. When, how, or if, you just knew it could. When you go into a war conflict situation, you know that you're going into a situation where you have the right to shoot the enemy as they have the right to shoot you, because that's what it's about. That is what open warfare is about. And so there is a fairness to open warfare. that doesn't exist in terrorism. Now, all war is what it is. You know, if we lived in an ideal world, we wouldn't have any wars. But if you're going to look at what war is about one one group of people against another group of people, and it's about who can overpower the other. And in normal warfare, that's what you're dealing with. You're dealing with that's what you were dealing with in World War Two, World War One, and in so many of these situations. But in Northern Ireland, it was just all terrorism. You just never knew what was going to come at you. Um, so yeah, 100%. You know, those are the conversations that we had before he left. It's like I that's why I've trained all, you know, I've trained all these years for this.